Hello again. That was an amazing first panel, has us thinking really about higher education and our institutions and how the erosion of them may actually be a threat to national security, and we should think more critically about what's next. The next panel discussion is the future of federalism and state and local power, and is moderated by Kevin Moore, Senior Research Fellow and Voting Policy Scholar at the Brennan Center's Democracy Program, specializing in voting rights and election. Please join me in welcoming Kevin.
Great, thank you, Dean. I think this is a nice conversation to have following up on the one that we just had. The amount of money that comes to state universities from the federal government. What is federalism? What is local government? What are states? And how do they all interact with one another is an important conversation, and one that I'm excited to see weaving throughout the day. So I've got a script that's been written to introduce you to the topic of the conversation. But as polarization deepens and executive authority expands, tensions among federal, state, and local governments have and are intensifying. Deep policy divides over voting rights, over abortion, redistricting, especially right now, public health, and other issues have not only widened the gap between red and blue states, but have also strained their relationships with the federal government. Of course, over the past 6 months, the president's reliance on the National Guard to advance his agenda on crime and immigration has further tested the boundaries of legal authority and disrupted our traditional understandings of federalism. So the questions we're going to be engaging with right now are: how are state and local leaders responding to shifting federal actions and funding cuts? Where are the funding opportunities for innovation? How can policymakers preserve and strengthen voting rights and rule of law amid all of these various pressures? So I'm excited to have up here, the first person listed is the Attorney General, who will be joining us shortly. But on my far right is Kareem Crayton, who you heard from earlier this morning. He's a vice president at the Brennan Center. I have the honor of working closely with Kareem. Next to him is Jake Grumbach. Jake is an associate professor, here at Goldman, an author of a book on federalism, on some of the things we're going to be talking about, Laboratories Against Democracy. And immediately to my right is Representative Barbara Drummond, who was elected to the Alabama House of Representatives in 2014, and she represents the great city of Mobile. So please join me in welcoming our panelists to the conversation. So I want to start by asking Jake to comment a little bit on some of the broad themes that we've been seeing. Jake's book from a couple of years ago touches on kind of the divergence of the states in their approaches to democracy. So Jake, set the stage for us a little bit by talking about what you found in your book, but also how does the patterns from a few years ago, how can they help us understand what's happening right now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many, absolute heroes in the audience and up here on this panel. So my book, Laboratories Against Democracy, available at any fine or trashy bookstore. It really focused on the long struggle for democratic equality in the U.S., especially around voting rights and redistricting. And it focuses on the long struggle. The U.S. has always actually done quite a poor job when it comes to the first dimension of democracy, that is majoritarianism and political equality, the one person, one vote principle, only really in effect after the implementation and enforcement of the Voting Rights Act in the 20th century. And then my book really chronicles that states over the past couple of decades have re-diverged with sort of two tracks. One in expanding access to voting rights and the ballot and drawing fair legislative districts, and another set of states really backsliding on democracy, not to the extent I was missing. That was my hype music, everyone. One set of states really backsliding on democracy, not to the level of Jim Crow, of course, which was essentially like infinite political inequality across black and white in the U.S. South, but very meaningfully so. Setting some records in partisan gerrymandering in the 2010s had real consequences. So post-Dobbs decision by the Supreme Court, I estimate 2 to 3 full abortion bans were implemented in states against the wishes of majorities of voters due to gerrymandering. A minority of anti-abortion voters could set the majority of state legislatures and pass policies out of step with the constituents of that state. That's minority rule in the US, and that's been a long struggle. I will say, though, that the acute crisis of 2025 makes my analysis look a little quaint. The second dimension of democracy, which the US has actually been remarkably strong on has been the prevention of concentrated authority in a single individual or small group, right? Through checks and balances and a decentralized set of constitutional institutions, checks and balances in the federal government and federalism, multi-tiered government with state governments having their own constitutional authority was supposed to be a bulwark, and the diverse decentralized civil society of the US, decentralized business communities across firms and industries, labor unions, we have union leaders in the room, federated organizations with enterprise bargaining rather than centralized sectoral bargaining, and a diverse civil society around guilds like lawyers and the US Bar Association and so forth. All of this was supposed to be a bulwark against authoritarian concentration and consolidation, but that has proven to really be remarkably untrue. And going back to what Jesse Rothstein led the last panel in saying, it creates a especially difficult collective action problem for these decentralized institutions within American federalism, state and local governments, as well as decentralized civil society, firms, labor unions, guilds, religious congregations, and so forth, to coordinate to resist an authoritarian push. So I think that's the puzzle we're in right now. The one person, one vote principles and majoritarianism are absolutely still going to be an ongoing struggle, but we need to really confront this second dimension of democracy, and that's the rule of law and concentrated power.
Thanks, Jake. I am excited that we have folks from Alabama and from California up here, because I think that, well, first, let's welcome the Attorney General. Thank you for being able to join us. So now we have people from California and Alabama up here with us. I think to kind of put some flesh on the bones of what Jake was just talking about these two tracks, we have representatives from parts of the country that are moving in opposite directions, that are on each of these two tracks, but they have something in common, which is a conflict with the federal government, kind of in different ways, right? And so in Alabama last year, there was a defiance of a federal court order to draw a second majority black district, which is kind of an interesting response, a state unwilling to follow a court order. And of course, here in California, just earlier this month, we've seen kind of from the other side, maybe we might think about it, trying to use state power to interact with what's happening at the federal level when we think about states and the balance of power in the National Congress. So I'm hoping that both of you can talk a little bit about how you understand your state's relationship with the federal government, either the courts and or the Congress and or the presidential administration. So Attorney General Bonta, why don't we start with you, and then we'll have Representative Drummond go.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. Rob Bonta, California Attorney General. Honored for the opportunity to speak a little bit about where we are with federalism, where California is vis-a-vis the federal government. I think one sort of statistic captures a lot of where we are. We've sued the federal administration 46 times in 43 weeks. And that is based on, thank you, that, and we hoped to never have to sue the federal administration. We take no joy in it, but it is our duty and responsibility to make sure the rule of law is followed, that the Constitution is honored, that rights and freedoms are not trampled on. And so what we do is based on what the Trump administration does. And our position is very firm and very clear. If they break the law and hurt California, we will sue them. If they do not, we won't. Pretty simple. So they choose how many lawsuits we bring. They choose when they will see us in court. And real quickly, we are winning over 80% of the time. In the early days, securing restraining orders and preliminary injunctions, barring the unlawful conduct, often within hours after we file. More and more, as our cases have advanced and progressed, we're securing final judgments. And final judgments in cases saying that the Trump administration has acted unlawfully. And they are repeat offenders. They keep doing the same thing, trying to exercise Congress's power, trying to violate the sovereignty of our states, trampling over rights and freedoms like birthright citizenship, a constitutional right, like voting rights, the right from which all other rights flow. And so our job is to try to restore the balance of federalism. You're supposed to have a federal government that follows the law. You're supposed to have a federal government that stays within its lane. It's a big lane. Mr. Trump is probably the most powerful person on the face of the earth based on his official authority. Yet time and time again, he reaches into other areas in our constitutional democracy to try to usurp their authority. He wants Congress's authority. He wants to power the purse desperately. He wants to tell the states what to do and micromanage what we do in violation of the 10th Amendment. So I believe our role is to push back when there is overreach, meet the Trump administration at the bounds of their authority and say, you cannot cross this line. You have to stay in your lane, within your vast and powerful bounds. Use those to advance your agenda, but you may never advance your agenda unlawfully. And I think, this may be a little bit of an interesting way to look at it, but this is our Constitution working the way it's supposed to. The power is dispersed throughout vertically and horizontally through the three branches of government, between the states and the federal government. There are co-equal branches of government. Unfortunately, Congress is supine in their role. They are not exercising their role as a co-equal branch of government. The courts, most of the courts generally are, and that's important, and the states are as well. So our pushback against a federal government that is working outside the lines of our constitutional democracy is exactly what we should be doing. We are asserting our constitutional authority as states and making sure that our rights are not trampled on and that our authority is not undermined. So I believe our role is to hold the Trump administration accountable for their unlawful conduct, to push them back and brush them back, if you want a baseball analogy, when they go outside the lines, and make sure everyone stays in their lane and plays their role. And we're really fighting for the future of California, given our role as the largest state in the nation, the fourth largest economy in the world, the most diverse state in the nation, the state that has led to the, sorry for all my bragging about California. Alabama's awesome too. The state that has led to the phrase, as California goes, so goes the nation. So I feel in this moment, so many eyes are looking west to see what we do in California, and what we are doing is pushing back against an unlawful administration and winning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Barbara Drummond from the great red state of Alabama, and I don't say that braggadly. But I am looking to California. All of what he is, I am not in Alabama. You talked about, we were successful. Everything that we've done, the law has had to hold us up. We created a new, not a majority race district, but an opportunity district. We only have one minority representative from Alabama. We now have two. One is in an opportunity district, Representative Terry Sewell, and now Representative Shamari Figures. And right now, the state of Alabama is doing everything the federal government wants them to do. They are looking to dissolve both of those districts. We're fighting very vigorously to make sure that that doesn't happen. On last Friday, we got a ruling in our Senate districts, which is very interesting. We stand to lose 2 of our senators as a result of that ruling. But right now, Alabama is waiting on the great Louisiana ruling. And they're hoping that it will be into their affirmative so that we will lose those districts. But it's very interesting to me. I have been in office since 2014, and Alabama is very selective when they push back the federal government. I was there when they passed the most restrictive abortion law in the country. And then IVF, the Supreme Court ruled about IVF and said that embryo is a child. And Alabama says, wait, we made a mistake. And the federal government says, okay, you got to fix it a little bit. They didn't really fix it. They just put a Band-Aid on it and said that we will now give those organizations immunity. So it's not fixed. So the Alabama does the tiny things to push back on the federal government. Usually it stands in concert. I am in a super minority position, and everything that we do from our caucus, we're having to sue. That is how we're able to affect some of those changes. And I tell folks that it's very interesting to me being in a state that is the bedrock of the civil rights movement, and now we're going to be standing on some other things. I think I see a little hope of future that Alabama is going to change. not in giant steps, but in small steps. I think that we will. I right now I am holding my breath because I don't want Tommy Tuberville to be the governor. So we're working very vigorously to try to find someone to offset that. But when you look at areas like AI, Alabama is now, the federal government is saying, I want to have all control. Alabama said, wait a minute, we don't want to do that. That we want to have some regulatory power that we can, taxation and so forth, so that we can make money. So there are small areas. But Alabama is just the opposite of California. When I was sitting there listening at the Attorney General, I'm going, oh God, I wish I could go there. But I say all of this because I would not be in this arena if I was not willing to fight. I am chair of a House Democratic caucus. There are 28 of us out of 105. And there are areas that we fight and are successful. And in the creation of the District 2 seat, that was something that we fought very vigorously for. So when I say that I see a little ray of sunshine, that is it. I sit back. He didn't tell you, I recently ran for mayor of Mobile, which is the second largest city in Alabama, and I was up against a millionaire who raised about $1.8 million, and I raised a third of that, and I came within 720 votes of him. So I tell people it is changing in Alabama. For me, it's not just as much as me being a minority representative, but also being a female in a state that doesn't respect either of those. But we're going to continue to work, and we're going to make sure that our next generation will have some hope of a future that we can be able to think for ourselves and have autonomy from the federal government. Because if it starts, I always tell people, I think all of this starts at the very bottom, because when you look at things that have happened nationally, they began in Alabama. I remember just before the federal government did DEI, all of our universities, we passed a law. I didn't pass it, I voted against it. But we saw it happening there. And one of the things that I think the professor said before that from Fitz, that when Kamala Harris came to Fitz University, she said, the most important thing that will preserve federalism in this country is that we vote. The very people in Alabama who's voting against their interests, guys, they don't even know that they're voting against their interests. And I think recent rulings on SNAP and some of the other things are showing them that we've got to start paying attention. As an elected official, I feel it's our duty to educate them.
Thank you. I'm very glad you brought up the kind of the historic role of Alabama as well, because if I'm not mistaken, Selma is part of District 2, right? Shamari figures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, Selma is a part of Terry Sewell's district.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Shamari figures the new district covers the Black Belt, which has always been very underrepresented. It's majority Black, and it's probably one of the most fertile part of Alabama economically. And now Alabama wants to pay attention to an area that has been forgotten. It is poverty-stricken. This is my personal story. When I got elected, there was a young man who went on to play with the Dallas Cowboy, and he came from the Black Belt. And he told me, he said, Representative, I worked very hard to play football, because if you all know, Alabama loves football, Alabama and Auburn, War Eagle and Roll Tide. And this young man, but it was very tragic to me because he came out of a community that did not even have proper sanitary sewer. And guys, we're talking about today. And the young man said, and he was quoted in the New York Times, he said, even God has forgotten about the Black Belt. Now Alabama realizes that economically, our workers have got to come from the Black Belt, as well as our future as far as getting new businesses to come to Alabama. So now we're paying attention, and so Shamari now represents that district.
Great. Kareem, I want to turn to you now as a representative of a national civil rights organization. You know, I don't know if I should say you or we. Us at Brennan, yeah.
We'll check some from here, too.
We are involved in fights at the state level and at the national level, and I'm curious how you think about opportunities for reform right now. Where ought we to be focused I think about, Jake brought up the Voting Rights Act and how that was really the first time that the 15th Amendment was enforced. We need federal enforcement for some of these states that aren't going to do it on their own, and yet the federal government is not a particularly amenable venue for some of this right now. So I'm curious if you can talk about how Brennan approaches these questions of advocacy at the federal level, at the state level. I know you and some of our other colleagues filed an amicus brief in Calais, the VRA case right now. So just kind of help us understand some of these complexities.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. Before I do that, I want to say as a personal matter, I neglected to, but I want to absolutely say to the people who organized this, I did not name them, I need to, both Jean Cheng and Elizabeth Mart, who are somewhere here, they've been carrying around mics and everything else. I'm especially thankful to each of you for putting all of this together. And I should mention, of course, there are people on our side, including Kevin Morris, Tanvi, Krishnamurthy, and Melon O'Keefe, who also were doing work to pull all this together, but I'm grateful for that. But let me get to the substance of your question, because I think it is important. We all at the Brennan Center had a lot of hard conversations after November. Even before that, preparing for the possibility, but actually now seeing what has happened, we were very much focused on trying to figure out a strategy for this moment. As I said, I'm thankful that before this all happened, we'd been, working with a lot of simulations to imagine what different sectors of our society should do and what our role should be. We have been, thankfully, really practiced at the art of bringing groups together, both to start thinking about problems, but also crafting solutions. And that's really been what we've tried to implement since November and the changeover in administration, and frankly, this turn towards, frankly, what can only be described as the autocratic. So how have we done that? The first thing we really spent a lot of time doing is pulling in groups of people who don't commonly talk to each other. Our view has always been, we are a nonpartisan organization. There have been a lot of people, I think it was the president from Johns Hopkins say, there have been people who've thought generally, well, this political thing isn't for them. And I think now, as Representative Drummond says, people are starting to get educated the hard way about the impact of a government that decides not to invest in the way that we've all expected them and have seen them invest. So what do? We try to find opportunities for people to engage. And I would just use one example. There's so many, but a group called Mormon Women for Ethical Government, not the most liberal people you'll see on the planet, and also some of the most committed small d, democratic values folks you're going to find on the planet. They stepped in. You probably have heard the stories about Utah. They stepped in and were the named plaintiffs in this case challenging redistricting in Utah. Now, this is separate and apart from what the federal government has been doing elsewhere, but they stepped up and said, we don't believe that it is appropriate, or for that matter, lawful, for the state legislature in Utah to ignore a public ballot measure that said, look, you have to draw districts in a way that respects communities of interest. And they succeeded in the state courts to make certain that the county of Salt Lake was fairly represented in the way congressional districts are drawn. And I know in the press it gets presented as D's versus R's. There's that aspect that can't be ignored. But what can't be missed in this story is how important it is that communities that exist, that expect being represented, aren't overridden by interest in a state capital in favor of whatever the White House or a party leader says. That's sort of the point, that the public should be able to drive their will throughout decision making. Second thing we're doing, and I'm now once again going to call out my colleague Larry Norton, who leads a team that works regularly with defending election administrators. We are in a space where, again, it wasn't that long ago where no matter you were a Democrat or you were a Republican, you expected a democratic system to sort of manifest itself in the polling place. You should show up no matter what your party is, have a ballot, get the ballot cast, be free from interference or intimidation, and you would expect that ballot, once cast, would be counted. We can't rely on that anymore. Larry's group has been working consistently long before this, but working extra hard now, working with administrators who are now in a different environment where they can't depend on the federal government to be an active supporter of the work that they do, either through funding or training. And so as a part of the civil society, we've had to step in and help them prepare for a world where they're maybe all alone. at least outside of groups like ours that are trying to support them, but they may get some pushback from the federal government. We now know, all of you know, that there's political violence, unfortunately, now that is a part of our lives. Again, the federal government used to be a protector from that. We don't know what's going to happen when the federal government either, pulls away from that or, unfortunately, could be an active instigator of that. You probably saw messages from the President of the United States essentially saying some people elected should be put to death. I'm in California where, when the Californians decided that they would put a ballot measure to change the district system, there was the sitting United States Senator who was accosted by federal agents. These are people doing their jobs and speaking out on behalf of their people that they are charged to represent, and yet are targets of threats of violence. So I'm thankful that teams like Larry's have been working with election administrators to make sure that elections are free and fair. We've also done the thing that we've heard a lot about today, gone into the courtroom. The president has attended in a few instances to try to overreach his authority by trying to change the way independent commissions like the Electoral Assistance Commission, again, another bipartisan body that was created after the 2000 election that does this before now seemingly simple charge of making sure that people get, again, a safe and secure opportunity to cast a ballot by finding innovative ways to help administrators cast or create systems that allow for people to show up, to improve the opportunity for people to vote. And through an executive order, the president attempted to try basically to nationalize this concept that is contained in what is called the, quote, SAVE Act, which would require, among other things, you to have a passport to be able to demonstrate that you are entitled to vote. That's even after you've registered to vote. So we went to court and succeeded to convince a district judge to say that is an overreach of executive authority. It's not over. The fight continues with that case, but it's important in all of these ways for us to be loud, to get partners, and to work as much as we can for the public to understand that this stuff isn't just going to resolve itself. It can't be that somebody else is going to speak up about it. We all have to. I want to mention last before I wrap, because I know I've gone on, the amicus brief that Kevin referenced. And we should say, the elephant in the room is we're all talking about cases that eventually will find their way to the United States Supreme Court. We know that the United States Supreme Court at present is wrecked. And I say that in terms of its structure and, frankly, its output. They don't respect precedent. They don't tend to follow some of the very rules and principles that used to be easy Republican points. These are mostly Republican appointees. The notion of federalism, the notion of respect for states, it's something that goes out of the window, apparently, when ideology doesn't line up with their output. That's a real concern. So one of the things we try to make clear to this court, in this case, Louisiana versus Calais, challenging Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and its constitutionality, is to say how important it has been, not just to the D's and R's in Congress, that's officially what the fight seems to be about, but really the impact of this law has had the greatest change in cities, in counties, in school boards, places where people who are voters are closest. You would know who your city council member is. And Section 2 has had a profound impact by broadening opportunities for voters to select people who are from their communities. If Section 2 goes away, we wanted the court to understand that that would dramatically change the opportunity for these communities who have a horrible history of being marginalized to be pushed back into an era where politics was just for white people. And I have to be blunt about it because that's the truth of it. And importantly, these are areas where politics, that is the D's and R's, aren't always on the ballot. These are nonpartisan races. But that's where this idea of undoing the evils of racial segregation and discrimination in voting has had the greatest change. And so our hope is, again, in all those ways, that we have a lot more impact. I know, again, I apologize for going on, but you invited me to just sermonize, so there it is.
I'll always listen to a Kareem sermon, so yeah. Well, thanks. So I want to, one of the things that's most interesting to me in this moment is we're in a moment of really excessive government action and really excessive government inaction. We just ended the longest shutdown in American history, right? So we have a very overzealous presidential administration and a Congress that is not doing a whole heck of a lot. and a Supreme Court that is relying on what is called the shadow docket, right? Making decisions without them being fully briefed or fully discussed. So I want each of you, and I'm going to start with Jake because it's been a while since we've heard your voice at this point. But what do you see as the biggest threats right now? Both kind of where are the biggest threats emanating from when we think about all these different ways in which the federal government is broken, and also which institutions are most at risk from these threats, whether those are federal institutions themselves or state or local level ones?
Excellent question. So what we're seeing now, I would summarize it as sort of a form of mafioso governance, which can be summarized as going to either state or local governments saying, hey, nice city you got there. It would be a shame if ICE or the National Guard were to enter because we don't like the way you run elections in your county. Going to a firm and saying, nice company you got there. It'd be a shame if we had hostile IRS or FTC action, FCC action as well. Nice law firm you got there, you know. It would be a shame if you continued to be adversarially legal against the administration. Particularly with owners of large firms or numbers of firms too who have bent the knee in the Game of Thrones phrasing in Trump 2 in a way they didn't over Trump 1, saying nice set of companies you got there, would be a shame if antitrust enforcement were to be hostile and things like that. The goal of the administration is to consolidate power. That is the point there, right? And when members of Congress, local governments, firms, when they fold, right, and acquiesce to the demands of mafioso governance in this way, it's hard to disentangle. Are they doing this because they agree with the administration on this policy area? They actually want to make voting harder in their area. A court actually, likes what the administration does or sincerely believes in unlimited executive authority? Or is it they're in a bind and they actually worry? Even the Supreme Court, as conservative as it is, does the conservative majority actually worry that if they rule against Trump and Trump says, you and what army, that they lose their institutional legitimacy? That's observationally equivalent in the social science sense. It doesn't really matter. The point is, what do these institutions do when faced with that choice, with that mafioso governance threat? And there, the point is, institutions, and my students ask me what is to be done, and we've heard a lot, you got to vote, right? You can even make campaign contributions. You can be an activist. You can do peaceful protests. There are many forms of participating in American politics. But one is within the organizations and institutions of which you're a part is to say we're willing to take the pain together with other organizations. I see another university under this same threat. We are going to, with them, take the pain collectively and withstand this threat rather than folding one by one. That is the fundamental collective action problem, and that is the fundamental threat. I would say there's hopeful things over the past couple of decades. I studied state governance and democracy. We've seen in states first led by states like, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, later California in recent years, doing things like automatic and same-day voter registration, like incredibly meaningful, especially for young voters, no big partisan effects. It really helps everyone participate in a secure, fair way. Innovations in campaign finance. We've noticed in Trump 2 how extreme levels of wealth inequality and money in politics really does distort democracy at a level we haven't seen, and this has been something discussed, really since Aristotle, that high-end wealth inequality can really disrupt constitutions and institutions. All of these innovations at the state and local level are great, but within federalism, this is the challenge. It doesn't cancel out democratic backsliding in other states. California doing extremely successful universal mail ballots with backstops and voter centers and automatic voter registration, that does not cancel out voter suppression and extreme levels of partisan gerrymandering in other states. States regulate elections from local dog catcher up to president. It's not just contained in that single state. That's why it's important to use states and localities as laboratories of democracy for these reforms and get engaged, experiment, but eventually they do have to bubble up. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, they do have to bubble up to the federal level at some point. And that's being prepared. I think another bright spot is just thinking about these innovations and coalitions. Like I have been on commissions and thinking about preventing electoral subversion and things with very strange bedfellows. I really do like it. Kareem has talked about this. Others have talked about this. Members of, close to the George W. Bush administration, their support for democracy was more real than I had expected when I was, coming of age and during that administration. And a grand coalition around the rule of law and democracy, I do believe is possible. And to think about these reforms, even though they're not politically feasible now at the national level, if we don't plan and discuss them now, and then when given the political opportunity, they will never be implemented. So that is what's really crucial. This is across the board. I see David Huerta nodding up there. Labor reform as well. Some of my research is on the democratizing and solidaristic force across race, gender, and other identity groups of the labor movement, particularly in the mid-20th century and their alignment with the civil rights movement. These are things that are possible with the political opportunity, and this time we'll be much more prepared.
Thanks, Jake. I feel like you had to represent the academy by referencing Aristotle there. So that was as the social scientist on the panel.
Thanks for noticing.
Yeah. Attorney General Bonta, I'm curious your thoughts as well. What do you think, sitting in a state like California, what are the biggest threats right now? Where are they? Are they what are happening in other states? Are they what's happening in California? How do you think about kind of the threat landscape?
Sure. I think there are a number of different threats. I think that the biggest threat arises out of and emanates from the executive branch, no doubt about it. But I think more can be done in each of the branches as well as the states and with the press. So what do I mean? Let me start with painting a picture of how a appropriately running, smoothly running, constitutionally compliant democracy in the United States would run. We'd have an executive branch that complies with the law, follows the Constitution, loves its people, cares for them, has concern for them, works with the other branch, the Congress, to hammer out issues, meets with good faith and collaboration to get to solutions and pass bill packages and budgets and sign them. We'd have a judicial branch that follows the law and follows the facts. Let the chips fall where they may. Just call it like they see it and issue opinions and interpretations. We'd have states that assert their rights as sovereign states within our United States of America that push back against unlawfulness, any infringement into their roles and to their authority. And then we'd have a press that makes fair but firm inquiry, increases transparency, reveals improper actions, and are truth seekers and truth tellers. That's how it should work. There's problems in every one of those areas. What are they? Congress, as I mentioned, is supine. They are not asserting themselves as a co-equal branch of government. They are letting the president also be Congress and having his way. And their job is to be yes people and to approve whatever he wants. There are some states, there are 23 Democratic Attorney General states, and then there are the other states. The states led by Republican AGs have not once lifted a finger to push back against the unlawfulness of the president as their people have been hurt, as millions and collectively billions of dollars have been withheld from them that Congress appropriated for them, as their rights have been trampled on. They have sat on their hands, cowardly, feckless, and craven, and allowed it to happen to their people. That is not them fulfilling their oath of office and pushing back as states with sovereignty under the 10th Amendment. In our press, there are some press that are just propagators of propaganda and misinformation and disinformation, like 24-hour propaganda machines. It's like, they're more political opinion makers than actually truth tellers. And then in the federal government, there have been many courageous judges who, under pressure, who have been told that they should be impeached, or told that they're activist judges, or told that their so-called judges have done their job. And that's what they should do. A courtroom should be a sanitized place, free of politics and political influence, where only thing that matters is facts and law. The shadow docket, the emergency docket, has been a place that's been challenging, and maybe in need of reform one day soon. The stats I saw have shown that I think 90% of the time when a shadow docket, emergency docket decision has been made by the U.S. Supreme Court, it has favored Trump. You don't have transparency. You don't know what judges. You know that a majority of the judges have found procedurally that there should be a stay on a lower court order, but you don't know who, you don't know why. Sometimes you get some peaks because there's a dissent, because there's a concurrence, but there's certainly not an opportunity to fully brief, argue the issue, have an opinion that guides lower courts on what they're supposed to do. They're making decisions without guiding the lower courts. There's no opinion to seek guidance from and to follow at the lower court level. So there are problems everywhere, but most in the executive branch. This is a branch that is it is contemptuous of the law, and it is cruel to the American people. Like, look at SNAP. 42 million Americans who are eligible for SNAP. It is an entitlement program. If you're eligible, you're supposed to get the funding to eat food. In the United States of America, the wealthiest nation on the face of the planet, where probably obesity is a bigger challenge than hunger should be. We need to feed our people, and they deserve it. And we had the money for it. The law required that the SNAP benefits be paid. The federal administration, the Trump administration, said they were going to pay the SNAP benefits before they deleted that from their website and said they weren't. Like, they reached and stretched and tried their hardest to break the law, pretend they didn't have the funding, and to reverse course on the decision they already made. And that is both unlawful and cruel. I believe society should be judged on how we treat our most vulnerable, our sick, our poor, our seniors, our children. Trump gets an F, no doubt about it. And SNAP is Exhibit A, and he was using it as political leverage to end the shutdown and to say, I'm going to starve hungry Americans until you allow me to rip away affordable health care from Americans. That's the choice, and that is not a choice. That is not a choice. So what else is he doing? He is implementing unlawful tariffs that after people in America screamed at the polls, lower our costs, he raised the cost. And he had to try. He had to reach to do something unlawful to raise the costs for Americans. And so he's done that. He's militarized our cities. He has literally sat there and said, you have high crime in city A, whatever, Chicago, LA, Portland, you name it, when the crime is down, and said, we're sending in the military to fight crime, which is precisely what is unlawful. The Posse Comitatus Act says you can't use the military to engage in civilian law enforcement. So, it's transparently unlawful, what he's saying. And so the unlawfulness, the cruelty, the contempt for the law in the executive branch is our biggest challenge. But there are weaknesses in all of the checks in our system right now.
Thank you. Representative Drummond, I want you to answer this question because I think you bring a very interesting perspective to this. Being in the super minority in your own state in a moment when the federal government is acting this way, for you, when you think about serving your constituents, kind of doing politics in a way that cares for your community, what are the hardest things for you right now? Where are the biggest threats? Are they at the state level? Are they at the federal level? It can be all of the above. I'm sure it is. But I'd be interested to hear you talk about that a little bit.
I truly think that they're all above because a number of the issues as outlined by the Attorney General, especially with SNAP benefits, and when you come from a state that is very poverty-stricken where, it was not our caucus from the very moment began to try to persuade our governor to expand and get some reserved money to take care of those who are on SNAP. And she refused to do so. And then finally, she released about $2 million to the food banks in our state. But I think it's all of above for me in a minority state because, again, all of what is being done, my state, those that are in power, they usually embrace it. Just recently, when I was flying up, I got a call from someone who was very upset on something that the Trump administration is about to do, and nobody's mentioned it environmentally. I live in Mobile. We sit on the Gulf Coast. We're at not the Gulf of America. We're at the Gulf of Mexico, and we sit there and many of us, like myself, we remember the BP oil spill that just totally killed all of our tourism, not to mention all of the endangered species. And we understand the Trump administration is getting ready to change the endangered species list. And many of those things can be found in the Gulf and in our Delta. And I was very surprised that one of my colleagues across the aisle called to inform me that we're going to have to look at this. We go back in session in January, and that, ADEM, which is our Alabama Department of Environmental Management, we may have to end up suing the Trump administration to prohibit that, because many of those species that they've talked about, even from the wolf to the tortoise, can be found in Alabama. So I agree with the Attorney General. I think it's in all the fabric of life. I am a former reporter, and when he talked about truth tellers, I was in journalism, have a degree in communications. When truth meant something, it doesn't anymore. And I live in a state where we do not have a full-time newspaper anymore. It is all about click counts. And so I think for me, in addition to all of what has been said, I think the one that is most troubling for me, Voting Rights Act, but if we don't have an environment, guys, we won't have a tomorrow. And I think that one was the most troubling, and that is coming down the pipeline now for all of our states.
Thank you. Well, I could sit here and ask you all questions till the cows come home. This is such an interesting conversation, but I want to open it up and let other people also learn from you all with their questions. So we're going to take some questions now, like we did on the last panel, collect a couple of them, and then pass them to the panelists. I saw Paul's hand first, but...
I think the Attorney General answered my question, but I'm going to ask it again because I saw Paul Gronke, Reed College, Elections and Voting Information Center. I will say that Jake gave another academic shout out to Martha Durthik, so thanks for the adversarial legalism. I prepped a question for the Attorney General on areas of potential cooperation across partisan aisles, and he answered it, which there wasn't any, but then Representative Drummond perhaps provided an answer. So I guess I'd like to ask all of the panelists, but the two of them, if there are any potential avenues for cooperation among the attorneys generals and among state legislators, perhaps within their state or across the states. One that is in my own area is voter file access. I don't know if there's interest, at least the last time there was attempts to grab voter files and pull them up to the federal level. Both Republican and Democratic states resisted that effort. I don't know if that's going to happen again. But again, I'm looking for opportunities here to maybe cross these partisan divides among state legislators, among attorneys generals. I just think that would be a good thing to find areas where there could be cooperation. And so that's what I got.
Thanks, Paul. There's another... we're going to grab a couple, and then we'll consolidate. But
Hi, Jessica Gonzalez with Free Press here. You all talked a bit just now about meaning makers and truth tellers, and the previous panel also spoke about attacks on the academy, who I also think are folks who try to help people make meaning about what's happening around them, disinformation campaigns designed to shield people from what's actually happening around them. And I'm just thinking about the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, and how he's abused his power in the context of merger reviews and these media companies that is another form of consolidating power. And we saw how, for instance, when Skydance was trying to buy Paramount, and which ended up going through, they launched an investigation, an unlawful investigation, made them appoint a bias monitor. Trump got a $16 million payout, and on and on. And now we have another major media merger that was the auction was announced this morning. We have Skydance going after Warner Brothers Discovery, a major consolidation of the market. I've been talking about with folks in Hollywood who are really concerned about good union jobs, as well as the use of these processes to obscure and to censor the media. And so I'm just curious from the Attorney General, but also from Representative Drummond, like, what can our state do in this instance? Because it seems to me it might invoke antitrust.
I'm going to let you guys take those on. And if you can talk about cross-partisan cooperation, and you can weave the two questions together. You'll get extra points for it. But
Can I start with his question about the voter file and so forth? If I see a ray of sunshine there across partisan lines in Alabama, I don't. I hate to say that, and I really don't, because there are so many dog whistles and suppression tactics that are going on, and when they invited me to sit on this panel, I'm just coming off a mayoral election, and in the middle of the mayoral election, they updated the voter file by 22,000 in my city, which I think probably cost me the election. And I am going to introduce legislation, but the chances of it getting out of committee, it is almost like sitting there biting an apple. You take one bite at a time. And I'm going to sit down. We've got an election coming up, and I will sit down with the Secretary of State and hope that we get that passed. But there are so many dog whistles of suppressing the vote in Alabama. I wish that I had something more meaningful, because we have introduced, since I've been there since 2014, we've introduced same-day voting. They will not even entertain it or let it out of committee. So right now, I'm not very optimistic that will happen.
I'll address your point, and I didn't mean to want to suggest that bipartisanship is dead. It's not. It's very limited right now. As you know, if you just look out into the political arena, the R's and the D's, Team Red, Team Blue, are pretty far in their corners. I do continue to believe that we fight a lot about issues that really divide us, though there are many things that unite us, and whether it be wanting safe streets or good schools or economic opportunity or a planet for tomorrow, whatever it might be, I think we agree on quite a bit, but manage to find ways to fight. The AGs are, in terms of challenging Trump's unlawfulness, are very clearly in two different camps. But it doesn't mean the AGs don't work together. What do I mean? There are areas where we have common cause, where we are sometimes joining, like, almost every attorney general in the nation taking on an issue. Almost every attorney general in the nation has sued Meta for hurting children, and with its online features, and that's bipartisan. I think it's a good sign that there is bipartisan support for kids and their mental health and their safety. Same with TikTok, lawsuits across the aisle, and then recently when it came to some misuses of AI, chatbots having sexual conversations with kids, or chatbots teaching people how to kill themselves who are in mental distress. We signed letters together as Democratic and Republican AGs in support of reform that protect kids. So it's still there, maybe hanging by a thread in some ways, but I think if you seek common ground, you can find common ground, but you have to seek it and want it. And there's other places as well. Public safety is job number 1, 2, and 3 for me at the Attorney General's office. So we're tackling illicit gun trafficking and fentanyl trafficking and human trafficking. And we work with the federal government, and we work with local law enforcement folks. We work with Republicans. We work with Democrats. We work with Republican administrations all the time. And it's just about getting the job done. The mission, enforcing the law, holding folks who break the law accountable. So that's still a place and a space where there is bipartisan work. To your point about antitrust law, I think one sort of macro observation of the federal administration is that they are receding from certain traditional areas of responsibility where they exerted authority. Things like protecting consumers, the CFPB, things like pushing back against enforcing antitrust law and pushing back against monopolies and anti-competitive behavior, things like enforcing civil rights. And so if they're not going to do it, or they're going to do it with less robustness or muscularity or interest or passion, the states can do it. Certainly California can. We have our own antitrust law. We bring our own lawsuits. We have one right now against one of the biggest companies in the world that it's just us. And we don't need the DOJ, and we don't need other states. We can bring our own antitrust lawsuits, and we will. And we're pushing back against an agreement on an antitrust suit that the U.S. DOJ entered into, where we think there is corruption. and like lobbyists that were guiding this result. And so we want to push back against the proposed settlement and get one that is worthy of the people of America, to lower prices and increase competition and make sure there's high quality. So we have independent abilities to enforce some of these laws. But when you see things like an attempt through an executive order, which we have seen a draft of, it hasn't been a final executive order yet, where the Trump administration is trying to say there will be preemption when it comes to regulating AI. Only the federal government can, states cannot. And then, so they will preempt the space and then do nothing. And then that's like zero regulation. Or it could be weak regulation. But the federal government is there to create a floor, and then states can rise above it. And California has consistently risen above it to provide greater climate protections and climate action, greater consumer protection, stronger antitrust enforcement. And that hasn't changed. States can get involved in the cases that you've mentioned and challenge them as appropriate. I mean, and we're the home of Hollywood. We're the home of some of these biggest studios. We want healthy competition. So without previewing anything we may do, if there's something to announce, we'll announce it. But we are aware of what's happening.
Yeah, my question is about.
We got two
Sorry.
people with mics. In the back first, and that, yeah.
Oh.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you. My name is Darius Kemp. I'm the executive director for California Common Cause. I want to thank Barbara Drummond for being here as a native son of Birmingham, Alabama, and an A&M Bulldog. Just want to thank you for being here, and AG Bonta for all your work with us over this past election, over elections in the past. I'm really curious, as someone born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and currently a resident of San Francisco, California, I really see all of the amazing work we've built here in California. And I want to bring that every day. I think, like, how am I going to bring that home to Alabama one day? Or how am I going to help people back home connect with the amazing work we've been able to do here in California? So I would love to hear any sort of thoughts you have around how do we actually build, and I'm also an organizer by trade and a mobilizer by trade. So how do we actually build connections to really take all of the things we've learned here in California, all of our best practices, our best policies, our best laws, and how do we build grassroots and human-based connections with organizations to actually get those laws proliferated around the country? And I know you're exactly right. Like, the state legislature in Alabama is not going to do a lot of the things you or I would want them to do. But there has to be some sort of ground level movement to start that process. And so I'm really curious what you two think about that.
Well, I think that it has already started in Alabama, happening organically in some of the more marginalized communities, especially when you look at a number of the social issues that are affecting Alabama, from Selma all the way back to the urban areas. So you're seeing little threads. I can't remember who said this earlier, that groups are just popping up. And they're thirsting for knowledge. But one of the things that I think that many of us who are in leadership realize is that we've got to educate those that are being affected. Guys, I always tell folks, I want more for them than they want for themselves, but they just don't know it. But we've got to start doing it organically. And I see threads of that. If you ask me if I see any sunshine, I think I do, through the people that we represent, because when you start looking at those social issues from the environment to SNAP, they now realize I've got to become a part of the game. And so I see that happening in Alabama, especially in those very marginalized communities. If you go look in Alabama right now, and someone told me this and I didn't believe them. We had filed a lawsuit on the District 2 race, the new congressional district, and they said, Barbara, if you go into the Black Belt, they outvote in the marginalized communities 5-1 in the urban areas. I didn't believe that until I got the data. And those folks are still in the struggle. We've just got to bring that kind of momentum back into other areas. And I'm seeing little tiny bits of it. And especially, I think one of the equalizers is the environment. I really do. Voting, we always are talking about voting, but when farmers, as well as those in urban areas, are seeing all of the detriments to not only their crops, but to the economic climate in their communities. So I see little threads. Those are the things that I have hope. I have hope in the people, in the next generation, that we will become a state that is not so embedded in race, but more in the economics of who we are.
I'll say that California often, so I'm back on my bragging about California position, it often does things first and best. Not always, but often. We have some of the strongest climate laws, consumer protection laws, labor protection laws. We are very inclusive with health care. And we remain the fourth largest economy in the world. So what we are doing is there for all to see, and it's not hidden. The laws are there; anyone can access them. We have some of the strongest gun safety laws in the nation. By the way, we turned in 30 years from being one of the states with the highest firearm mortality rates to one of the states with the lowest, because of, not in spite of, the laws. And so I think that's a point of inspiration for others, should they want to follow our lead. And many do. Many blue states are like, what's California doing? We want to do that too. And some sign on to our clean car waiver laws to reduce emissions and protect the environment. And we're also a blueprint for change if you want it. It's right there. But you have to want it. And you have to, and so it's political. And politics is the art of the possible. And some folks are, their position is, don't California my fill in the blank. If California is doing it, they don't want to do it for whatever reason, even if it makes their people healthier or protects their workers or preserves their environment or protects consumers. But there are different places in the system by design where change can be made. If the Congress isn't going to do it, then maybe a state legislature can do it. If a state's not going to do it, in a red state, maybe a blue city could do it. And so, the folks that you're talking about, grassroots folks, are going to drive it. Like some of the biggest change in our nation, it's come bottom up, not top down, from the people who are not accepting the unacceptable and pushing for change. And a lot of folks have said, I've heard them say it to me and in other places, I'm not interested in politics. But politics is interested in you. It is everything in your life that you care about, from the water you drink to the air you breathe, the schools you go to, the safety of the streets, the healthcare that you have, the housing that you have, the protections you have in the workplace. That is politics. And so if you care about those things, then you do care about politics. And if you care about politics, you have to get involved. And if you're looking out at the world and saying, this is not something I want, this is not what I signed up for, then raise your voice, the most powerful and potent force that there is in a democracy, people power. But you have to be organized. I've seen people change minds of legislators with their powerful individual stories and turn folks around from saying no to saying yes. But you have to be active, you have to be engaged, and you have to be involved. So I think good ideas, if they make people's lives better, will be replicated. And so success should be scaled. And to the extent California has demonstrated success, I believe that should be scaled. But again, art of the possible. You need to be within the Overton window, which is what is possible. That window moves, and people move it. So engagement is at the people level is where change will happen.
All right, let's take two questions now. We got one up here, and there's. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is about what's coming in 2026 with the midterms. So just in the last few weeks, we've seen to me, incredible pushback. We had the No Kings marches, just amazing grassroots activism. We've seen this entire time the Democratic AGs pushing back, coordinating and pushing back. But I'm just wondering, to what extent civil society groups, Democratic AGs, and local electeds are beginning to game out what it is this increasingly desperate White House might do to, suppress the vote, prevent mail-in balloting? How are we gaming this out so that we do have free and fair elections in 2026?
And then there was, yep.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Metestein. I'm actually Darius's predecessor as executive director at California Common Cause. I'm now with Tech Equity. You talked in the panel portion of today about the power of states, the power of local governments, the power of the courts, the power of various institutions. And unfortunately, it feels like all of them pale in comparison to the power of a small handful of new robber barons that lead our tech companies. And a tech CEO has a one-on-one conversation with the president, and the next day, our position on China or on AI or on H-1B is totally different. And so my question is, if there's a total consolidation of political and economic power, are the reforms to the democratic process, do they necessarily have to be paired with major reforms to the economic process or the economic system?
I think this works well. The first question, I think Kareem is well positioned to answer, and then Jake for the second one. But
Sure. I may try to do a little of both, but I definitely want to get to the 2026 point. It is something that we at the Brennan Center and certainly a lot of groups in civil society are really focused on. I mentioned earlier a lot of work being done with election administrators to prepare them to deal with what might be a hostile environment. We have a report that sort of summates all of the different ways in which this White House, unfortunately, and the administration have sort of signal that they might not want to have a free and fair election. We are also suing in a lot of different spaces to assure that the use of military force is limited. It is based upon whether or not we have a court system that actually follows the law. But I just want to make a point that I think bridges this one with the other question, which is really the power of the people is not something that should ever be lost in this conversation, because democracies are really ultimately all about people and their consent to be governed. And so to the extent that, talking about oligarchs have to sell things to people. And what you've seen amidst all the bad news is mobilized efforts by the public to say, we don't like your cooperation with a policy that hurts our community, and we're not going to support it. And if you're a company like Target, you're starting to feel it. This is happening in a lot of concerted ways that aren't really always bubbling up to the national media, in part because of some of these consolidations, but it is something that people are starting to recognize they have the influence to push back on. It also matters that they mobilize to cast ballots. And I'm going to say this and stop. What is really important to remember, and even in places in the South that look really tough, and I know Representative Drummond knows this, in addition to the point about people in the black belt of the state overperforming in terms of showing up to vote, we have a lot of people who are sitting on the sidelines that are registered to vote who don't see a reason to show up. So part of the point about an economic message, what does it mean if we show up and vote, that we get back in terms of policy? Part of this job that we all have, whether you're running for office, whether you're in civil society, is to offer people a vision for what happens if you do show up. Because I think that's what people right now are seeing. They're seeing a lot of problems. What they're not necessarily seeing is a connection between the vote that they cast and what happens as a result of that. And I think that's our collective effort. We have a chaos moment that is a crisis that we know we don't want, many of us. So the question is, all right, if we get rid of that, if we're lucky enough to get through this moment, what is it that we want to do next? And I feel like that's the charge and puzzle that we're working through just now.
These are great questions. I think two potential crossover, potentially bipartisan or at least partnering with small c conservative interests at the state and local level and county level. One is on, in 2026, making sure ballots are counted efficiently and quickly to not give an opportunity for chaos merchants through hostile social media and so forth to disrupt trust in the process. So it's not just about ballot access, which many states are doing incredibly well now, but also efficiently counting votes. And second is, this is something that does bridge, I think, between the left and the right, at least, principled conservatism, is that, police forces are constitutionally state-based authority. The ultimate commander-in-chief is the governor, delegated to mayors as commander-in-chief. Police forces need to obey their commanders-in-chief. Rather than, especially when there's a threat of some sort of federal incursion around polling places or around immigration enforcement and things that contradicts the state and local commanders in chief. That's a point in federalism that's incredibly important and hasn't been done all that well. And then finally, on the sort of oligarchy point, this is absolutely true. I don't think states and localities are well positioned to deal with. Elon Musk is not only the richest person on earth, he's the richest person in human history. His wealth nearly doubles each calendar year. This sort of wealth consolidation at the high end, the US has actually, in recent years, done okay on reducing economic inequality sort of in the middle and semi-upper parts of the distribution, to its credit, but high-end wealth inequality allows for example, loss leaders within the same portfolio. Elon Musk can buy Twitter, make it a huge profit loser, but he gains wealth because of its political influence. Or Grok as an AI tool is not the most effective, but it does put forward a political set of messaging that's incredibly important. That set of wealth consolidation and then media firm consolidation is incredibly disruptive to democracy, and that's something new federal administrations will really have to deal with.
Thanks, Jake. I think we've got time for one more question. So who wants to take us home? Yeah. I didn't mean to put the pressure on you, but
Next question solves this.
I'm just curious. I don't live in California anymore, grew up here, but I found the decision to gerrymander, if that's the right verb, for what has happened now in California at the time kind of disturbing. I probably would have voted for it if I lived here. But is there an alternative here? Because this feels to me like a real race to the bottom.
Yeah, there's an alternative. A federal law that says every state should have an independent redistricting commission. That's the alternative. And
some of us helped write those provisions. That was in H.R. 1 in 2021. Some of us helped write those efficiency gap provisions there.
Yeah.
We could have had it.
Yeah. And then one point to say, as much as I know that there are people who feel pain and don't like the concept of what, the people of California decided to do with this recent proposition, but I'll say, as you're thinking about the absence of a national standard, which the Supreme Court of the United States failed to adopt when it had the opportunity, which Congress and, the early 2021 era failed to adopt in terms of a national standard, what we're seeing now is people learning the effects of what happens when there's no sheriff in town. And as it turns out, this may be a ray of hope. There are Republicans in the northeastern part of the state of California who recognize all of a sudden, maybe we should get the gospel and get a national standard. And certainly there are Democrats in places like Texas who recognize the same thing. And so there may be an opportunity now, having gone through this, we'll see, for people to start recognizing, all right, we may not agree with each other on a lot of stuff, but none of this serves us as a whole. So we will see what happens, but in the absence of a national standard, in some ways, this is states helping us understand that we need one. That's one way to think about it.
Thanks. Well, with that, it is lunchtime, or shortly to be lunchtime. So join me in thanking all of our wonderful panelists.